Hey everyone, it's your girl Maddie here, aka Beaver Mosh. Today talking to you about the new Acausal Intrusion LP, Seeping Evocation off of Voidhanger Records. Seeping Evocation is this duo's second LP following last year's Nullitas. And Acausal Intrusion plays a very experimental brand of technical death metal. But it's a technical death metal that is very cavernous and desolate and gritty. I would compare this band's sound to a handful of acts, one being Ulcerate, and I would draw that comparison in terms of the very complex arrangements here. I also definitely hear inspiration from Gorguts and just the overall weirdness of this thing. And lastly, I would point to Portal and just the sense of dread that Acausal Intrusion brings with their music. On the track Formless Conjoining Chaos, you have these obtuse, winding guitar riffs that create this mindfuck of a maze for you, the listener, to wrap your ears around. The drums here are fascinating. The snare sound is noticeably odd, but overall the drums are very compressed. And while this is definitely metal drumming, the drummer also injects an element of jazziness here, especially in the cymbal work. Acausal Intrusion on this album uses dissonance as a weapon to its advantage. Now, what I'm about to say about technical death metal, don't take it as a critique of technical death metal as a whole, as a sweeping statement. There is plenty of tech death that I love and adore. But I don't think it's a hot take to say that a lot of tech death can fall into the trap and be prone to just a lot of directionless noodling and just playing fast for speed's sake. That is not this album at all. This record is filthy. It's dense. It's terrifying. It's heavy. The technicality comes through how angular it gets. Its technicality comes to the very calculated arrangements versus just a lot of virtuosity and sweet picking. And that is shown on the track Mnemonic Confabulation. It's just a 9-minute force to be reckoned with. Creates this oppressive atmosphere. The vocals here, these tortured growls, they're nested by these unorthodox, labyrinth-like drum patterns. There's these atonal guitar riffs throughout that hold up these oddball guitar leads that have zero pretense of accessibility or hookiness. It's almost like the guitars here are anti-strutting. On the track Transformational Death Phenomenon, it does this thing where it builds and it builds and it builds with layers of dissonance and abrasive, abstract guitar riffs that seem to come to a point where it almost feels like it's too much, for it to become overwhelming. But as it reaches that point, it pulls away, but then it builds up again and it retries to get to that breaking point again, but it never quite reaches there. but it leads you there multiple times. And it's this thrilling sense that it creates for you. Now, I'm gonna butcher this next track name. Nithra Cthulhu Atazoth. I'm sorry. I know that's probably not close. But it's this acoustic piece. But don't let that fool you. This is, in my opinion, not a respite. This is not a pretty interlude. There's just these bizarre chords that are very unsettling and not easy for the ear. It does not sit well. And to some, this track may feel out of place. I don't hold that opinion. I think where it sits on the track listing strategically, it adds, with its jarringness, it adds to the overall puzzle that Acausal Intrusion is very intentionally putting together and very carefully constructing for you. And that way, I think this track works very well where it's at in the track listing. It doesn't feel random to me. The track Consultation of Nothingness. I love the very earthy guitar tones here. You have these chuggy, down-tuned, brash guitar riffs. It's big. It's probably the most cinematic point on this entire record. Now, I almost guarantee that this album, Seeping Evocation by Acausal Intrusion, is going to be a divisive one. I can see people absolutely hating this thing. And on the other hand, I would not be surprised if this down the line becomes like a cult classic. Now, I don't find myself landing on either of those extremes, but I am a fan of this thing. I am drawn to the dizzying guitars, the crazy vocal performances, and the maddening drums. And I love with all of that, the just attention to atmosphere that Acausal Intrusion has. The production, while maintains its technicality, it's rough, it's gritty. Everything, all of the instruments mesh together, but in a good way. I don't say that as a criticism. A lot of bands can try to be quote unquote avant-garde or just weird, like this band does. But often in doing so, these other acts can collapse under their own weight and lose focus and just seem overly pretentious. Nowhere on this album did I feel like that is what happened to Acausal Intrusion. I think they knew what they were doing and they figured it out, and it worked throughout the record. This album is fucking bananas. It's uncompromising. It's dismal. It's relentless. It's complex. Yet, it's equally thrilling. And for me, it was very rewarding and worth the patience that I think this record definitely requires and demands of the listener. And that's all of my thoughts. If you could be so kind as to hit that like button, give me a subscription if you would be willing to. Keep it metal. You could follow me on Twitter, link in the bio. I would love to hear what you think of this record. Thank you for watching. That's Maddie, aka Beaver Mosh, signing off.